My name is Khalid Malik. I grew up in Nairobi, Kenya. My parents come from a Hanafi background, and within the family there are others who are from a Wahhabi background. And I basically followed their mother as a youngster, although I wasn't particularly aware of what the madhab stood for. And we had possibility to go to the local mosque for Quran classes, and that was about it. Beyond that, I didn't know much about history of anything. I had no knowledge. We were not taught about that within the home. Most of the knowledge came from when we interacted at the mosque. And even that was restricted knowledge. Adapting to the status quo that appeared in the community that we lived and followed the rules of going to the mosque. There wasn't much religiosity within the house, other than I used to see my mother would pray, and I would see my father maybe sometimes pray, but there wasn't that element of religious upbringing within the house. The basic community and everybody within the community and the youngsters would attend the mosque, which was in the local locality. We'd go to school and come back and we'd go for Quran classes. And that's where we would just be taught Quran, to read Quran. But that was about it. Even there was no decimation of any knowledge about the background to what was being taught to us. So it was just basically an issue of just learning and reciting what we were told, and that's about it. We were completely oblivious to what the Hanafi madhab stood for and what have you. And whenever there was a situation where we wanted to interrogate and ask questions, we were just told, keep quiet, just follow what you're doing at the moment, and that's it. So that's what we did, but I wasn't really satisfied with all that. So I always had question marks in my mind. And then as situation would appear, that over a period of time, I began to become a little more forthright and ask more questions. Even then, when I was asked to not to say anything, I would continue to ask questions. And I used to get told, just stay away, just don't ask questions, just do whatever. I mean, there's that. So I kept quiet, but I was never satisfied with that. And I remember instinctively that there was, when I was a young child, my mother used to leave me at somebody's house, and I grew up, that lady actually was looked after me. She also used to teach at the school, and because it was a school that was next door to our house, it was convenient to me leave me there. And they had, very close to that was an imambara. Okay, and I was not allowed to, as we grew up also, was always told not to go in there. And I had question marks on that as well. But I could not ask because I didn't have enough knowledge and what have you. But instinctively I was drawn towards that for some innate reason. And it was basically having no grounding whatsoever and not knowing the Islamic jurisprudence. We were not taught any of that, Sharia, what have you. So we grew up as kids who wanted to achieve something in life and excel and succeed in whichever way we wanted. And we really didn't care about the rules. Everybody wanted to outdo the other. We're living in an environment where everybody would boast that their children become engineers or doctors and what have you. And it was all to do with material things. Because they became doctors and engineers, they had a good life. They could afford to have good things and all that. So I was never inclined for that academically. And I went the other way. And I said, no, I must succeed on my own and do whatever I need to do. And show them that I can do better than them. So that's what drove me on. And as a result of that, when I was young, I came over to England. My parents emigrated over here, and I came over here. And I succeeded in doing what I wanted. I got everything material that I wished I wanted to get. But within that aspect that was going on, I was very unhappy. On two counts is because I was basically leading a life which was in a state of transgression. In many aspects, I knew it, but I really didn't know where to stop, right? I was driven by material things and so forth. But inwardly, I was very, very unhappy. Outwardly, I would not show that to anyone. I was seeking. So in 6 months, about 6 months of contemplation once, occasionally I used to get up and pray when I felt like it. And I would go for Taraweeh prayers, and I would go for this and all that. But I would question why, and I would never get answers because there were no books. The only books that were available were at that time the Sunni books, Sahih Bukhari, Muwatta of Imam Malik, and all these things. But again, there weren't very many answers in there. And because I wasn't really that interested to know a lot, I didn't know where to start. Then one day I had somebody who came into my life, and through an acquaintance, a friend who we knew each other well, and they came to my office, and when I looked at the person, his face was really had nur on it. And my friend who brought him in thought that he's going to come and talk business with me. But instead he told me that, looked at me and said that everything I have will be gone in 6 months. I will have nothing left. I should get out of what I'm doing right now because all that what I'm doing is haram. And explained the meaning of wudu to me in a manner that nobody has ever explained. And for me, that was the turning point, the first turning point, to take it to think. And exactly 6 months to the date that I had that first meeting, I lost everything, and materially. And then I had that contact. He left somebody with me who was part of his group. He was a sheikh, a Sufi sheikh. And he left me with a contact person. I remained in contact with him, and they told me to read Quran. And I said, I can't read Quran, right? I had forgotten, because as a youngster I had read Quran, but I had forgotten most of the time. And so I followed exactly what I was being told to do. It was just remarkable because there was somebody who just come in, I met 6 months before, and everything he said to me was materializing to be exactly as is. And the way the things happened and the unhappiness that I had and the burdens that I felt on myself before, suddenly when everything happened the way they did, I felt at ease with myself. Now I had nothing, but I was at ease. It was a very strange feeling at that time. And everybody thought at that time, my family of course took it negatively. It had a big impact on them because of lifestyle changes and what have you. But I could not, now for me I was on a path that was irreversible in terms of wanting to know. And as time would go along, I learned to read Surah Yasin, and I started praying, and then I was told to go to the United States to a rehabilitation center. The Sheikh had a rehabilitation center in America. I went there, and it asked me to go there for 40 days. And to try and find myself. I went there, and it was a very good place to go to. I felt very calm there, and I went second day, I think it was the second day, I went for wudu. And there was a gentleman standing right next to me. He was doing wudu, and I did wudu, and I did it the Hanafi way. He did it his way. At that time I said his way, the way as is described in the Quran. And I went to pray, and of course when I went to pray the second day I knew there was an imam there, and there were people who were from different sects there. They were there because they were all in trouble with their lives, and they were being rehabilitated through the teachings of various shayukh there. And I basically looked at it after prayers. I went to the imam and I said, you know, this gentleman over there, he didn't do his wudu right, so his prayer is not right. So I was a bit, I was outspoken like that. And he was a very, very courteous imam. And he said to me, so Khalid, bring this gentleman over to me and come and have lunch with me, with him, invite him. And after Zohar, after prayers, we prayed together. Then there was the aspect of combination of prayer at that time. And there was another question that was raised in my mind as to why they had combined two prayers. But I did so anyway at that time. And I went there and I sat down, and after a meal we had in his library, he said to me, Khalid, how do you do wudu? I said, how do you do wudu? And he showed him how he did wudu. And I said, see, I told you he's wrong. Okay, because it's totally different to what I had been used to. So the Imam again was very courteous, very correct, and he said, Khalid, open the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, and look at verse 6. And I did. And when I read that, he says, don't stop there now, there's Bukhari there. He had a big library. And Bukhari at that time they had big volumes. There were maybe 30, 40 volume books there. And he says, open the section on wudu. He knew exactly what he was talking about. He was an imam. I opened and I read that, and the description in Bukhari was exactly as there was in the Quran, with an annotation that the Prophet ﷺ did not wash anything other than what was mentioned in the Quran. So I said, Subhanallah, I said, if I'm doing my wudu wrong, then what else am I doing wrong? So I began to question everything. I said, wudu is wrong, how about the prayer? How about the azan? Why is there a difference in azan? Where did this aspect of adhan in the mornings, why do we say salatu khairun min an-naum? At that time I didn't even know hayya ala khair al-amal. I had no access, I'd never heard it, and so forth. So I looked at it, and because I was there and confined to that sanctuary, it was a sanctuary I would call it, right? There was a library there. I decided to search, and I made dua. The same day I made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show me everything that is correct. And I had an completely open mind, and no restriction. My mind was looking beyond the boundaries of what I was confined to until then, from what my parents had taught and what the community I was in had taught me, basically. And when I looked at that, I saw, I would go into the library, and whatever book, I concentrated on Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. I opened, I had a question in my mind, I would open, I'd just pick a book at random, and the answer would be straight in front of me. Question on As-salatu khairun min an-nawm, how it was introduced. It's very clear in the Sunni hadith books that it was the second Caliph Umar who introduced it. So my question there was, why did he introduce it? Why did the Prophet ﷺ forget about it? Can he make changes to that? Right? Is he allowed to make changes? Then I come across a hadith which says, follow the sunnah of my rightly guarded Khalifas after me. That again is in Sunni hadith books, right? And I say it doesn't make sense. Here is the last prophet of Allah who has perfected the book. Allah has perfected the book, has done everything, passed the message, has died, but he has left something to other people to innovate on. And as I was there, I began making telephone calls back home to my friends, and I said, I have found this, and you know what? We don't do our wudu right. We don't do this right. Do that right. Oh, no, 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 no. I said, could you do me a favor? Could you go to Regent Street Mosque? Could you go to the library and look at the section of wudu, for example, to one of my friends? He did. He came back, he said, look, it's exactly as you've said, but I think it's a misprint. I said, no, nothing is a misprint. So it was that journey. And as I went along, I began to find, and within a short space of time, I began to change. Okay. Now, when I was doing that, my sheikh who was there at the time did not tell me ever that this is the right way or that's the wrong way. Okay. So I followed on, and I came back to London, and I said, okay, I've changed my path. At that time, I wrote a letter to my mother from there, and I said, I have found this is correct. And she wrote back to me and says, you know, I know you are on the Muhammadi path, but keep quiet about it. This was the response I had back from her. Officially, which she would say something else to me, right? That your Aqidah is different now, right? And come back to the right Aqidah, because there was, my mother was educated, okay? But she would say one thing, privately she would say something else to me. But I kept that to myself. I didn't say that to anyone, saying all that. And because of that, also relationships began to change. When they found out that I had converted to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, at that time it was through Sufism. I had no exposure to the biographies of the Imams or what happened and so forth. Because my question there was, Imam Ali, everybody talks about Imam Ali. Even when we were when I was a youngster, they would talk about the four rightly guided Khalifas, and Imam Ali was the fourth. And always I had a question mark on my mind as to why, if he was the best amongst everybody, why wasn't he the first one? Why was he the fourth? These are the kind of questions that came up to my mind. So I basically looked at, I began to research, and it was very easy for me. I found all the answers about prayer, about Iqama, about the aspect of the omission of Hayya ala khair al-amal from the thing, from the azan, from in terms of folding my hands, whether I should fold my hands or keep my hands straight down. It was important because from a jurisprudential point of view, it was very important, because if there is a law, and there had to be one law, then it had to be the same for everybody else. Not what I had learnt, that you can follow any of the four Imams and follow whatever they say. Okay? And take from each other. So while researching that, I would discuss openly with friends and family that this is what you're doing wrong, and if you cross your hands, where did the aspect of crossing hands come up? It was again the second caliph who introduced it. Okay, during the time of Abu Bakr, that wasn't the case, as an example, and it's recorded in books. And from that point of view, I wanted to. I just progressed, and then I wanted to learn about the history, about what happened, and so forth. So my interest has been going on now for the last 30 years in that respect. My conversion took place around when I was 30 years old. I'm 63 now. At that time, there was no information available on the Ahlul Bayt in the mainstream libraries or what have you. But there was one precious book that I came across, which was the Al-Murajat, The Right Path, and it was English, published by Zahra Trust. And I got hold of that book, and I read that in a few hours, because it was so interesting for me to read, because it had all the answers, and whatever research I had done and whatever I found was in that book. Okay. And that led me also to the point of researching aspects of history and see what happened prior to the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and during his last few years of his life, in relation to what happened afterwards, where the Khalifas came into account. I was interested more also in that, to put a picture in my own mind as to what sort of events would have led us to where we are today, where majority of the people are looking at following a religion, right, which is totally degenerate of real Islam. And within that, like other religions before that, in Christianity and Judaism, there were many sects that had degenerated views on their own religion. Islam was to be the worst, as it was prophesied by the Prophet ﷺ, that it would be worse than the Jews and the Christians towards the end of time. And the interest that I had was to understand where the problem started, and how they started, and how the manipulation of the whole history was rewritten about Islam. That history that we were, as youngsters, we were not taught or kept away from, but as we grow older, and as now most people are, they still read it and they continue to follow it. And that gave me a comparison to the history of what's happening in nowadays, about various events around the world where wrong is being done but is made to look as right, and history is rewritten, textbooks are rewritten to show a case which was opposite to the truth. And that was basically a key architect before the death of the Prophet ﷺ, in my opinion, were the first two caliphs, especially the second caliph, in my opinion. And there's irrefutable evidence to that effect, where he engineered everything happened just before the death of the Prophet and after, and the event of Saqifa, and kept Imam Ali away from his rightful position. And of course, the question always arose in my mind that if Imam Ali had risen in the wars during the time of the Prophet and was known as the Lion of God, why did he keep quiet? Why did he not take them on? And the answers are also very clear. Came to me that if you are he had advice from the Prophet ﷺ as to what would happen, number one. Number two, that if you're just a handful of people who are following the right path, and you have thousands and thousands of so-called companions of the Prophet who have deviated as soon as the death occurred, and prior to that as well, then the only way to save Islam was to keep quiet. There was a high wisdom in that. And that high wisdom then drew me on to looking at and studying the lives of the Imams, and looking at why each one of the Imams acted and dealt in a different way. And they all were faced with different challenges during their lives. And of course, the main point was that during the time of Muawiyah, in his green palace that he built with the money from the reserved from the treasury of the Muslims in Damascus, he hired all the old companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and they would fabricate hadiths according to, they wanted to contradict everything that the Prophet and his Ahl al-Bayt had been saying. So there was the opposite side of the story to be told, so to speak. And no matter what they did, they wrote books, they decimated that information. They had, he was the person who started the cursing of Imam Ali from the Mimbar for almost 90 years, right, on Friday prayers. And strangely enough, I came across the fact that he would pray Friday on a Wednesday. And even at the Mimbars, Muawiyah would not stand up because he was too fat. He would sit and give his khutbahs, right? And I said, how can somebody whom we were calling Hazrat, right, be called a Hazrat and be like that? And of course then the wars that took place and so forth. But importantly, it was the fabrication of the entire history of Islam was rewritten by the Umayyads to project a point of view that has been prevailing up to now. Okay? And that was a very, very strong point. That a lot of people, even today, who know about all the information that's available in the internet, still refuse to accept that, because they're just following the status quo. The changes that took place in my life were gradual over a long period of time. Although the change took place for the right towards the right path, there was a lot of baggage that I was carrying. Okay, and it's not something that you learn something new and say, okay, I want to just get rid of all the baggage I had before. So it was a very long process for me to learn about myself and to come out of the old habits that you have, that you, as a child, you carried through childhood up to the age I was around 30 when I converted. Now, in that aspect, while you're learning more and more, I was learning that through Sufism, okay, which was very interesting, but it took me almost 10, 15 years to grasp what the teachings of the Imams meant, right? Whilst I was professing to be following the Ahlul Bayt, it was not, I had no idea what I was doing, even then. Yes, I was on the path, but I could not relate to various things because you have your own self playing against you, right? And you have interferences from other people who now know that you have changed, while you're trying to find yourself within that change that you have. There were too many distractions as a result. So in the process, I created a lot of havoc as well, okay, in the situation. But life changed in the manner that a lot of the friends that I knew socially that we would meet would stop meeting me socially because they would say, oh, he's Shia. He's now become, some would say he's become a kafir, right? And of course, whenever I greeted them, I would always greet them, say, Assalamu alaikum, ya Ali Madad. So it's, again, something that was inherent in me, that was a bit I wanted to expose that aspect and say, do they really, to provoke a discussion on it? But they just didn't want to listen on that. And every now and then one or two would say, why do you say ya Ali Madad? I said, the same way you say to somebody, please make dua for me. Remember me. Here is Imam Ali, who is the gate to the city of knowledge, right? And he died a martyr, he's alive, so he can hear me when I talk to him. So if I make him a medium to say, please make dua for me, I'm not asking Imam Ali to do it, to give me something. It's to just be my intercessor with Allah to pray, and his dua will be granted. So that's how you say it, as an example. So socially, I was cut off. Family-wise, I knew my family members knew what stance I had taken, right? There were differences in terms of attitudes that changed, right? And those attitudes are still prevalent today, after all those years. And they become more pronounced now in the last few years, especially when this big move by the Salafi Wahhabis in terms of media exposure and so forth against the Ahlul Bayt, teachings of the Ahlul Bayt have come up. And when things were, say, 10, 15 years ago, I didn't have as much problems as I'm having today, as an example. But they have never deterred me, because I've always said to them, show me something better than what I know, I'll follow it. Right? And they have no answers. And when I relate to them that what I know is from their own books, right? They say, no, it's only because you Shia say it. I say, no, it's no question about Shia, it's in your own books. And it's your own narrators, because both Bukhari and Muslim were scrupulous, in my opinion, to avoid any hadith, relating any hadith from the Ahlul Bayt, from the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. They did not do that. So when the situation arose, I would discuss, and of course I've done a lot of research now, and I continue to do that. More importantly, to know now what is being said and so forth, to follow the challenges that the followers of Ahlul Bayt now have, and see if I can in some way make a difference. And it was only up to about 4 or 5 years ago that I first started attending majalis. I had no exposure to that before. I was still majalis and going to Matam and so, and that was not really on. It was not advisable. When I came to that, then of course you'll start learning about Imam Hussein. That's when I started learning about Imam Hussein alayhi salam and what Karbala happened and all that. So everything that happened had to happen to me in stages. It's like it was choreographed for me, that I would go from this step to this step to this step to understand. And alhamdulillah, now I'm in a situation where I can relate to things and so forth. So it was always then a desire to see, okay, for me to go to Karbala. I made many attempts, and I did not make it. Every time I tried, there was a hindrance. So I said, unless I have an invitation from the Imam himself, I cannot go. I used to think like that. And it is true also. And of course, when I did earlier this year, and I came back, and then everything else changed for me. My whole life perspective in life changed, and everything that I thought was a hindrance doors would open in a manner that I cannot even describe. To a point that I'm now very, very content, and I'm getting exposure to things that, and they're coming to me in terms of knowledges, in terms of seeking further knowledge about trying to lead the life of as how the Imams lived, not the pseudo Shia life that most people live, based on cultural habits. So I got exposure into that, and then of course I started discussing that with my Shia friends, and say, okay, there is an aspect of degeneration in what you do, and all that, and so forth. But again, then you find that intellectually that you cannot discuss some things, even with our Shia brothers, because they don't know. Their knowledge is limited as well. But alhamdulillah, within that, there's a family of the Ahlul Bayt now, and there are great benefits to know about Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and that again is something like was an amazing experience, because about 4, 5, 6 years ago, I would say I had certain difficulties that I could not find a way out of. And my daughter had also, in her own way, converted to Ahlul Bayt without referring to me. She was against me in the beginning. When I first converted, she thought I was crazy, but she converted by herself and all that. And she would buy books, and she would look at things and all that. And one day she came and left a book near my bedside table, and it was written "Miracles of Ziyarat Ashura." Now, when I looked at Ziyarat Ashura, I left the book there for many, many weeks. I didn't open it, because I said, I don't know what Ziyarat Ashura is at that time. I didn't. And one day I opened it, and it said, read the Ziyarat. I could not read it in Arabic, so it took me almost an hour and a half to read it in Arabic. I read it and do Dua al-Qama. And then I started to read without understanding it. And I read it religiously as a habit. And I've never left it. And with that, everything changes as well. Because everything that I thought was an obstacle would now disappear, like ice would melt. So the problem that I thought I had would dissipate. So the whole concept of the way I thought changed. Right? That was the benefit of the ziyarat, because it is, as I found later through studying, that the Ziyarat al-Ashura is different from the other ziyarat, because it has within it a lot of logic, reasoning that people can reflect on, and within that is the entire history of Islam, if people were only to reflect, because there's a hadith Qudsi that Imam Bakr alayhi salam said that had then exposed that to the general public through Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. And it's just been wondrous. So it's become like I have to do it. It's second nature. It becomes second nature. So visiting the shrine in Karbala was really a very, very humbling experience. And I plan to go there back again. And I have some Sunni friends now who have visited Karbala as well. And they come back with a different thing. And of course, on the way I met some people who converted, who converted to the path of Shia Islam. And I cannot thank enough. I cannot thank Allah for His bounties enough. And there is nothing more for me to say than say that if you're not on the path of the Ahlul Bayt, you might as well be like everybody else out there who doesn't know where they're going. I was taught to do the tasbih of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam 33 times each. Allahu Akbar is 34 times, according to the Ahlul Bayt. So I said to my friend, I said, when you dial a number, you got to dial 100 numbers, but you dial 99, will you get through? He said, no. I said, that's what we're doing. So likewise, everything else you're doing, that you're going for Hajj, you're doing all these things, but you are not accepting the vilayah of the Imam alayhi salam, Imam Ali and his progeny, as ordained in the Quran, then don't you think you missed the point? Because it's not about being good, about doing good deeds or giving charity and what have you, or praying or going for Hajj. It's not about that. Allah is going to ask us questions about whether we followed what He decreed for us, what He asked us to do in the Quran. Did we believe in His message? That's the question. And without the vilayah, all the other things are nullified, in my opinion. And it's not my opinion, it's what the Quran says. So open yourselves up to look at it. And they say, no. We love the Ahlul Bayt, but we will stay with our rightly guided Khalifas as well. The story of Imam Hussain affected my life in this way. When he left Hajj uncompleted and went towards Iraq, there was a lesson in that, because what he saw happening in Mecca at that time and what he saw in terms of what was happening, he had to take a stand for the truth. And in that quest for the truth, if Imam Hussain had not taken that step to move in the direction that he did, we would not see Islam and in the form that we know today, or we would have no teachings of real Islam today. That had a very big impact for me, because the aspect of the saving of the religion of Islam and the events of Karbala was so profound that we are sitting today and have to thank Imam Hussain for everything that happened. And of course this was foretold by the Prophet ﷺ. And in terms of Muharram, in terms of shedding tears for Imam Hussain ﷺ, there is a lot of precedence for that. Even at the time that Imam Hussain was born, the Prophet ﷺ, when he held him, he began to cry, right? Because he knew why he was, what would happen to him. So it was a question of whether Imam Hussain accepted the rule of evil, which was prevalent in Arabia at that time, or to stand up for the justice and the religion of the Prophet ﷺ, and of course what Allah had ordained in the Quran, and to follow Allah's messages. And Imam Hussain was the savior from not my understanding, as a reality check for all Muslims to understand that he did not fight a political war as the propaganda goes, that he wanted power. Imam Hussain stood for the truth to save Islam. And of course anyone who reads about that and who understands what happened and what took place at Karbala would shed tears for Imam Hussain, would reflect on the severity of what was done to the Ahlul Bayt at Karbala, and what's happening today. It hasn't stopped, by the way, it is carrying on today. The same thing is carried on for the last 1400 years. and we see the Yazid of today still there. But Alhamdulillah, through the advent of Imam Hussein's stand against evil, we have a movement today, which is a Husseini movement, and it will continue, and it is growing, and that is a huge benefit to all of us. My life changed in the following manner. I was suddenly relieved of all anxieties. That means my mindset now, since I've been there 8 months ago, I never worry anymore. I have complete contentment inwardly. I look at everything outside and I vision it from a point of view of the teachings of the Imams, alayhi salam, and how they want us, me as an individual, as their perceived follower, to interact. When I say perceived follower, it's to follow the teachings of the Imams is not an easy thing. Okay, it's a process that you go through, but of course you have to cleanse yourself through that process. So I found that within the last 8-10 months that I have been very clear in my mind in the direction that I want to go to seek the knowledge, to try and emulate even a little bit of what they were, and make myself into a good human being. And through that to learn to have Allah's forgiveness, of course, and to be content. So I have been content. In terms of opportunities of what I was doing and what I found to do, I had no concerns existentially about anything. I don't have them anymore. Things just come to me. I never have to look for anything. Whenever I have a difficulty, things present themselves to me in a manner, through people or whatever, that satisfies the needs I have. And that's an amazing experience that you can only say that is the barakah of Ziyarat Ashura, and also the visiting of the visiting of the shrine at Karbala. It's a personal experience that cannot be related or understood by people generally. And also in terms of my dealing with people and dealing with people who are adverse to me, I have I'm more at ease with them. In terms of how I deal with them, for example, I would argue or retaliate or act in a different way before. Now I just ignore them. It's almost like saying, the Imams taught, that he talk to people according to the level of their own intelligence, right? Again, that's something that was inherent in me. Okay, you think you know something and you want to have a point of view. So I left that, and I found that people were more accommodating then in that way. When I kept quiet now and just don't say very much with them, they're more communicative with me, as an example. So that's another huge benefit of that. My immediate family, my wife, for example, is very supporting, although she's following the Hanafi mother. She's very supporting of what I do, and she started she defends me now when anybody says anything untoward towards my beliefs and all that. That didn't happen before, as an example. Okay. So I would say there's more tolerance and more inner contentment. And I go back again to my early part of the conversion, when I first met the Sheikh through the Sufi path. I relayed a message to one of his murids recently, that what he was trying to teach me at that time took me so many years to grasp and to come. But I didn't know, through that path, I didn't know the Ahlul Bayt as well as I do now. And I can only thank him for that. And all that came after the visit from Karbala. The inner enlightenment aspect of it. So now when I pick up something and some book and I read a lot, I can relate to what I'm reading from a different point of view. And that's true from a point of view of basically trying to improve myself all the time and not to fall into the traps that most of us fall down in. We think, we assume, but we don't know. The reason it was easy was because I was seeking, and I had drawn all the veils, dropped all the veils. I just wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know who Imam Ali was, right? Who was the gate of the city of knowledge, what it meant. Once I reached to that stage, it didn't matter to me what anybody else thought, because I was going to carry my own burden, right? And of course, in the famous Munajat of Imam Ali, he talks of Imam Ali alayhi salam, where we talk about the parents, the brothers, the sisters will all try and ransom each other on the Day of Judgment, right? And there are 4 or 5 Quranic verses. That had a big impact on me as well. That since I'm not going to be responsible for anybody else but for myself, and my parents are not going to help me, or my brothers are not going to help me, and they're all going to fight with each other individually, according to the teachings, right, to try and save their own souls, so why should I bother with what anybody else thinks? I must be on the right path, try and be on what I think is the right path, or follow my heart from that perspective. It was easy for me. It was not difficult. Allah made it so easy for me from that point of view. Of course, the inferences of people and the attitudes and all that, that was difficult in the beginning. But it became very, very easy. And now it's completely immaterial. Everybody knows who I am, what faith I follow, and all that. And it's just as I was mentioned to you earlier on, my mother died recently, and I held a majalis and all that. And the feedback was that I shouldn't have held a majalis because I'm not the same sect as my mother. As an example, or praying for her, somebody to make ziyarat for her at Karbala was not called for, because I'm a Rafizi, as an example. But it's immaterial. It doesn't bother me at all whatsoever. I would say it was very easy. If you try and learn the truth and want to know the truth, and you have sincere in what you want to know, Allah will open up and show you the right way. If you are stereotyped and saying, okay, I follow my father and my father's, and this is the argument that comes across all the time. But when you put the argument forward that when Allah says in the Quran, when they will be asked who they follow, they say we followed the path of our fathers and our forefathers. But Allah says they were manifest in error, most of them, manifest in error. So why attach yourself to your parents? With due respect, you have to respect them for everything that you have. You can't have any form of contempt against them in any way whatsoever. But in the aspect of religion, Allah has given you a choice. And that choice is to follow the path which is prescribed for you. Everybody finds their own path, so I want to make sure that I'm on the right path. And I don't know anything better than what I know. Unless somebody presents it to me, I don't think there's anything else. No, it was very easy. It still is easy. I'm completely isolated in certain aspects from the family side, from friend side. But it doesn't matter. I also have good friends. They know my position, so they some of them respect it. Others I know they don't. But it really doesn't matter. At the end, my relationship with Allah matters, not with creation.